Hello, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. Thank you so much for joining us today for the RJI 2024 Open House. We hope that you find this session very informative and helpful, and we look forward to answering any questions you might have towards the end. Just as a heads up, the session will be recorded. We only record in the main session, not in small groups, but we aren't going to be in small groups today, so just wanted to give a heads up. Also, we will send over the recording when we're done, so you can, review anything you might have missed, or if you want to share it with your colleagues or network. So today we're going to get an idea on what RJI is, the goals and the purpose of the program, our core practices, the RJI network, and just so much more. You'll also have the opportunity to hear from some of our own alumni on what their experience with RJI was like and how it impacted the work that they do. But before we get started, I wanted to ground us and provide some insight on who the Shriver Center is. We're headquartered in Chicago, Illinois, and we work to lead the fight on economic and racial justice. And we do this by litigating, shaping policy, and training / connecting other advocates through programs like this, Racial Justice Institute. The Racial Justice Institute, or RJI, is housed within the Shriver Center's Art Department, which stands for Advocate Resources and Training. And our programs are built on 4 principles for effective advocacy, which are racial justice, community power, affirmative advocacy, and leadership development. So these are the members of the art team. My name is Christina. I'm the Training Programs Associate. Maha and Terrence are not part of this session today, but they are part of the art team and lead their own courses and programs that I can share a link to at the end of the course, but at the end of the session. But I will pass it along to our RJI director, Generic, to give a quick introduction.
Thank you so much, Christina. Hey, everybody. My name is Generic Holmes. Sorry, change my camera view. Hey, everybody. Generic Holmes. I'm the director of the Racial Justice Institute and Network at the Shriver Center on Poverty Law. I am dialing in from gloomy Brooklyn, New York. I'm like a little under the weather, but in good spirits. Just happy to sort of be with you all today and provide a little bit more information about RJI and what it's all about. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Christina so that you all can do some intros, share a little bit more about where you come from.
Thank you. Yes, I'm going to drop a link to the Jamboard. I'm going to share my screen. So now that you know a little bit about us, we'd love to know a little bit about y'all. So in the chat, I dropped a link to Jamboard. On the screen, you'll be telling us your name, pronouns, title, what org you're in, city and state, and what you're hoping to learn from today. So how to dock a sticky on Jamboard is you would click the sticky note option, the little square on the side of the screen. Just type in, your introduction, click save, and then you can add as many sticky notes as you'd like. And then just, drag it wherever you want to on the screen. So please, we'll spend like about 5 minutes doing this. Yeah, I look forward to seeing what y'all write. Okay, thank you so far to people who are adding their names. Please also add what work you're part of and like what are you hoping to learn in today's session. Okay, I see Shannon has added their executive director at Aurora Area Interfaith Food Pantry, and they're hoping to learn about what RJI is all about and what the process looks like in the time needed. You'll definitely hear more on that today. And also the appropriate project to submit for application. Yes, we'll also discuss that. I also have some examples that we can share towards the end so you can get an idea of what our past participants have worked on. Jennifer says they're hoping to learn more about the RJI Fellowship and how it can help them better serve their communities. Definitely. And I know our alumni panel will definitely give some more insight on how they've been able to use RJI to help their communities. So looking forward to getting more into that today.
Yeah, thanks, Christina. I would add to, the way that the application process works, we have a selection committee who really comes together to review the applications and sort of and score them so that we can determine who we're going to invite into the institute. I facilitate those conversations. I don't really do the scoring, so I feel very comfortable meeting with anybody who would like to meet before you submit your application to just talk about everything. Like we could talk about your equity team project, your team composition, just sort of any questions that you may have as you're sort of thinking about um, joining RJI and putting a team together based around the equity team project. But as Christina mentioned, we'll share more about those considerations later during this presentation.
Yes. Thank you, Generic. And thank you to everyone that's adding to this Jamboard. Please continue to add more information about yourself as we love to get to know more of y'all. And but other than that, I can pass it back off to Generic if you're ready.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you. Let me share my screen. Oh, I'm all set here. Sorry, my hotkeys aren't working for some reason. Okay, so I sort of wanted to just sort of briefly start out with a kind of brief bit of context setting about this current moment. In a way, we're kind of still in this sort of post George Floyd, Breonna Taylor uprisings era, where we did see a shift in the narrative around racial justice and sort of over policing and the murder of BIPOC folks. And so we saw all of these organizations release statements affirming that Black Lives Matter. Mississippi changed their state flag to sort of get rid of the Confederate emblem, which I'm from Mississippi. I never thought I'd see that in my lifetime, honestly. It's kind of it was a big deal to me. But, there's still a lot of resistance and pushback. I just saw today that the woman who runs the Libs of TikTok account, it's just a hate account, right? They hate BIPOC folks, they hate gay people, trans folks, they hate. But now she's like on the media advisory board for the Department of Education for public education in Oklahoma. So there's just a lot. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of resistance and pushback, even with the sort of strides that we've made. And so I think the question for us as racial justice advocates is how do we make this a movement and not a moment, right? How do we keep this momentum from 2020 going? Because what we know from a historical perspective is that racialized structures are built into the systems of America, right? It's in the DNA of America, for real, for real. Like America has constructed and weaponized whiteness for centuries through harmful practice such as redlining, which has really broad and grave implications for how local taxes are allocated to school districts, what schools have the proper resources, and what sort of neighborhoods have the proper resources for general maintenance and upkeep, excuse me. And so, in RJI, we never really just like to talk at you. We always sort of want to hear from your perspective, what you're seeing. And so we're going to shift gears in just a moment. And Christina's going to display the Jamboard again. And I'm just going to turn to you and ask you, we sort of just briefly talked about this from sort of a housing and educational perspective when I brought up redlining, but looking to hear from you, like, where have there been areas of your work where you are seeing the connections between race and poverty? Hold on, I can find the stop share button.
Yes, I'll go ahead and share my screen again. So yeah, we are on page 2 of the Jamboard. If you need a bit of a refresher, you just go here to the left-hand side, go to sticky note, type in your response to the next question, and head to the page.
Thanks, Christina. So again, just looking to hear, in your area of work or even in your community, like, where do you see the connections between race and poverty? Somebody shares over policing of Black and poor neighborhoods. Thanks for that. Thank you. Yeah. Again, continues to be a problem, right? Anybody else want to share the sort of connections in your work? You see those connections between sort of race and poverty? Okay, now they're sort of flooding in. Hold on. Christina, would you mind shifting those so they're not all just stacked on top of each other, please?
Oh yes, definitely. Um,
Thank you. Appraisal bias. Yeah, that's actually a big one that's not talked about that often, right? Um, more abandoned and vacant properties, more abandoned vacant schools. I think this is Massachusetts, capping the shelter spaces as a right to shelter state once an influx of Haitian migrants started arriving. Seeing constant intersections of these things, seeing how the DCFS cases of neglect are often just criminalized, poverty, right, and Black individuals are the most impacted. I work with immigrants, including survivors of human trafficking, T visa. All of my T visa clients have been Black girls and women who have been unhoused, undocumented. Foreclosure, stealing Black wealth and equity. Right, right, right. Disproportionate rates of people of color impacted by human trafficking and not understanding root causes. Foreclosures and deed theft scams, which neighborhoods are targeted by bad actors, right? Rhetoric around preferential treatment to some immigrants over others based on whether they're here legally, in quotes. Life expectancy is far shorter for unhoused folks, which are often intertwined with criminal justice system. Exactly, because we know that, once somebody has a bit of a record, right? It's harder for them to access housing. It's harder to do a lot of things that I don't think people understand. It's harder to volunteer at your kids' schools, right? All right, so thank you so much for this. Just wanted to get a flavor for what you're seeing, what you all are working on. And so, Christina, I can start to share again. Thank you. And so, really, you all just sort of uplifted a bunch of different intersections, a bunch of different issue areas within your work. And when we're discussing those issue areas, we're really discussing like well-being indicators in a way, right? And when we in RJI define opportunity, it's sort of always in close proximity with those indicators that you just uplifted, right? Um, Housing, the ability for Black and brown families to stay together and not be over policed by DCFS or over policed by the criminal justice system, right? Um, and what we see is that with all of these areas of opportunity, people of color often have um, uh, less access to food security. Some folks live in food deserts. Some people just flat out can't afford the things that they need, right? Less access to affordable housing, lower life expectancy, as somebody just pointed out on the Jamboard. And that often cuts across class, right? And this access to opportunity really has to be there for equity to happen. For communications, if you remember at the start of the pandemic, there was a lot of scrambling happening because not everybody had the internet, not everybody had computers, and so it was a bit of a scramble to make sure that students had what they need to be able to go to school. So again, all of these pieces just sort of need to be there for equity to exist. Oh, wait. And so just wanted to share a bit. I'm starting to get into the Institute itself here and its structure, and wanted to start out with this snapshot of our 2023 fellows who joined us. And then this is really another representation of that, but this is just sort of how the cohort was structured. Ended up being about 7 teams from 7 organizations across 5 states. Usually we have room for a few more teams. And so hopefully we can increase those numbers for 2024. And so in the Racial Justice Institute, we teach these 7 core practices. And these are defined in detail within the application brochure, which you've probably seen at this point. So I'm just going to review most of these and sort of share from my perspective why I think they are important. But really for RJI, we really begin with the foundational concept of structural racialization and the 4 levels of racism. And, structural racialization is a framework that helps advocates understand the sort of myriad of ways that our policies and our procedures continue to provide that opportunity for white people while denying access to opportunity for BIPOC folks. And I think what's important about this foundational concept for advocates is it really sort of starts to just sort of show the math behind how racism sort of continues to perpetuate within these systems, even when you can't find a racist actor. I think it kind of really becomes a bit of an aha moment for a lot of advocates because it's just kind of peeling back those layers that have always been so confusing. And structural racialization is really undergirded and buttressed by unconscious bias. It's our bias at those 4 levels of racism that's perpetuating those racist outcomes. And so then we dig into social cognition and implicit bias, which is really a way to help show us, help us better understand our cognitive processes and help us better understand how our brain works and how our brains can sort of play tricks on us so that we find that we are reacting to a situation, reacting to a person before we even are consciously aware of it. And then after that, we move on to, or social cognition and implicit bias includes a component on mitigating bias. And that's really meant to give you a set of interventions, a set of sort of tools and techniques that you can use to mitigate bias, to sort of create processes within your organization so that you can disrupt bias at that unconscious level before it even has a chance to rear its ugly head. We take a look at systems thinking, which helps us examine the systems that we work with, the systems that our clients have to deal with every day, to better understand how we might change outcomes to see a positive impact, how we can just sort of get to the outcome that we want to see instead of the outcome that we sort of continue to see through these various systems. Framing and communications really sort of helps us keep race front and center whenever we are discussing our advocacy. Sometimes we can sort of shy away from mentioning race when we're discussing our advocacy. RJI is really built on this central concept that race and poverty are inextricably linked in America. And so if you're doing anti-poverty work, you have to be talking about race because it's a part of the equation. It's a part of that algorithm. And so framing and communications really aims to give you a framework, a set of tools that you can use to make sure that you can keep race as a part of the discussion always, and also be moving the needle, also be bringing people to your side, also continuing to sort of get that buy-in while continuing to stay true to the sort of ethos of your initiative. And then leadership and organizational alignment, which gives us some language and frameworks to advance race equity agendas within our organization. Really, when you're doing this work, you need to be able to share a compelling vision to move the needle, to get the buy-in that you need within your organization. So it sort of provides a roadmap, if you will, to help you better be able to do that. And then, some of these are sort of self-explanatory, I think. Community lawyering, for me, I mean, that's really about understanding that doing this work, it's about lawyers on tap and not on top. We're doing this work in service of communities, and they often understand exactly what it is that they need, and we're just there to sort of help facilitate that. Multiform advocacy includes a set of sessions, including racial justice litigation, mapping for racial justice advocacy, and racial impact statements, to name a few. These are the core practices that really those core practices help support the sort of goals of RJI. And RJI is really a capacity building program at the end of the day, right? We're increasing the capacity of race equity advocates to do this work nationally, to do this work in service of their community, to do this work hand in hand with others. And so advocates learn these core concepts, take these tools back to their organizations, and transform their organizational culture and policies and practices to have an anti-racist focus and create an infrastructure that can support external race equity advocacy. A lot of times in doing this work, folks sort of start with the external piece without kind of cleaning up their own house. And we hope that we can provide the tools for you to sort of be able to do both, because we just think that they're both very necessary, that internal piece and that external piece. And so, through RJI, through sort of like learning these tools, hope that you'll be able to sort of better work with your community to, share these tools out and empower sort of long lasting community efforts. And all of this sort of ladders up to us developing a cadre of advocates as faculty and mentors for RJI and the network. And those people provide mentorship both within the network, but then also within the institute itself as small group faculty leaders and coaches. RJI is really about giving back. And throughout the whole experience, you're going to continue to meet people who've been exactly where you are, and they'll just kind of come and share case examples of what they did after they learned structural racialization and how it helped transform their advocacy and their work with communities. Here's a snapshot of the 2024 schedule. I think one of the most important things to note about this is 2024 RJI is going to be completely online. Last year we did hybrid, but this year, again, we're just going to be completely online for all of these pieces. But as you can see, even though it's completely online, it is still a very big time commitment. And the result of RJI is really reflective of the time that you put into it. The input really matters to get the output that you want. And so if you look at our application, one of the questions is really sort of centered around whether you're able to commit to this schedule. And as you reflect on that schedule, on the time commitment, would encourage you to just sort of be thinking about how you might shift responsibilities for the 7 months that you're with us to make sure that you just sort of get the most out of it and leave with a sustainable project. Okay, and so RJI is really, it's applied learning, right? It's what we call sort of action learning. And so in some ways, this is another way to sort of visualize the schedule components. But the entire time that you are in RJI, you're going to be doing independent learning activities, attending these live sessions. You're going to be applying things in small groups, which again are sort of, they'll be led by RJI faculty, many of whom are RJI alums who can just sort of share their experience. You're going to be applying things in your equity team meetings with your equity team, but then also your equity team meetings with your coaches. You'll be sharing all of that back to us through sort of reports and reflections, which gives us a little bit of wiggle room to sort of see where you may need a little bit more support, so that we might tweak a session here or there, or bring in a bit of a different case example, or introduce you to a different alum who can sort of share their perspective that continues to align with what it is that you're trying to do, continues to sort of align with your project. So again, just want to make sure that you leave with a sustainable project, because you're not going to finish your project while you are with us. And we'll say more about that in just a moment. And so wanted to pause here and share a bit of what the Institute Network means to our fellows, to our network, who continue to be our best ambassadors. So I am going to stop sharing, and Christina is going to play a video.
Racial Justice Institute is a collective of attorneys from across the nation. What makes us unique is that we take more of a legal approach, understanding that that legal approach can only be successful if it's done with the community.
You take this huge problem, which is like racism, which, how do you really begin to combat that? And really sit down with a piece of paper with a problem in the middle with all of these different arrows. And it's all right, I'm going to look at these 4 dynamics and think about who are the actors in these systems? What's your local tipping point? Who are going to be your partners in making sure that we are uplifting people of color?
For me, being part of the Racial Justice Institute, it's a very hopeful space. A lot of people are in this moment where they're really questioning, what are the right strategies?
Because there are so many of us now who've graduated from different cohorts across the entire country in different practice areas, we're able to connect with each other and communicate about the work that we're doing. And so we can find more opportunities for intersectional work.
It has given me a set of tools that have just sharpened my race equity work, but really my work as a legal services attorney.
And so for me, even though it's an incredibly challenging place, the more challenging thing, for me is when you're doing just one individual case after the other.
Being a community lawyer means learning when to listen.
So you really have to suspend that lawyer hero ideal.
It is so important to acknowledge your own implicit bias when you are doing this work.
I have peers that I look up to and contact on a regular basis. I have people to call if I have challenges.
So there's no better time to engage in race equity work or race justice work than today, because people are paying attention.
It can be very easy to get stressed out and bogged down by the work that you're doing. It feels like there are crises happening every single day. And sometimes you wonder, what difference does my work in one case matter when everyone else is still going to be suffering and everyone else is still going to be affected by these really racist policies? So by being able to look at it through a bigger picture lens, I'm able to see the value of my work.
The work is really hard. It's hard to see inequities and the effect that they have on people in really disenfranchised and marginalized groups. And so it's really difficult to do it every day and to still keep having passion about it and still being able to give to your clients. And so talking to people who get it and who support you is really meaningful.
So we're creating a space where when we feel the most hopeless, we can come together, just be with each other and encourage one another and continue that shared understanding that we do have the tools to fight this, and we will.
We are the movement.
We are strong together.
We are unapologetic about addressing race.
We're the movement.
We are the movement.
We are the movement.
Thank you so much, Christina. I love that video still. Okay, so very quickly, since we've sort of started to touch on these network pieces, I wanted to just sort of share what that looks like and what those supports look like. So I'm going to share my screen again, and then we'll turn to hearing from some alums who I think are really our stars here. I'm sure that's why you came, not to listen to me. So I'm almost done. Give me just a second. So again, just want to provide a little bit of color, a little bit of context about the RJI network and sort of what supports we provide. And so these are sort of the prongs, if you will, the places where we try to provide support after the formal institute wraps. And so, for instance, we have a super active listserv where folks just posit questions and often get really great responses. People share resources when they find them and just sort of provide general peer support, but also pitch ideas for network sessions. One thread last year was about what to do when an advocate, and often an advocate of color, is sort of being microaggressed by a client. Like, just how do you handle it in that moment? How do you handle it as an organization? Different types of organizations sort of have different rules for potentially terminating that relationship based on bias. And so I'm in the process right now of putting together what I'm calling a series of sessions about that. It may end up being about a couple of sessions, but just to share out a little bit about what it looks like when we get these inquiries to the listserv where we don't have a great response. Like, I try my best to just sort of meet those by building out these sessions so that we can just kind of come together to talk about that. And those listserv discussions, again, just sort of continue to help us better understand, again, sort of where there's movement, where there's a need for us to pull folks together to talk about these sort of issues that we're all facing. We also have a periodic newsletter where we share resources and updates about successful race equity advocacy, just sort of updates on impact and how people are using the tools around the country. And I'm going to say more about more of these in the next couple of slides. We are working on building out an online repository, a network site. Really, it's just going to house all of our resources. So when we have those webinars, it'll include the slides, any sort of resources that were shared during the session, and then also the recording of the session. And then also any sort of resources that have been shared via the listserv or just sort of shared generally. So we're working on building that out now, and it should be done during Q1. We had a site before, but it just became prohibitively expensive. So we just sort of had to shift gears and build out another one. We host periodic network convenings as we can afford to. Of course, we sort of paused this during COVID, but in 2023, we hosted our first network convening since the pandemic started. It was just really great to get together with everybody for, again, just sort of ongoing learning discussions so that we can hear the status of people's equity team projects and just sort of hear what people were up to and what they've been able to do with the tools that they've learned from RJI. This is a snapshot of the current network. Really, for your purposes, this shows where we're lacking representation and the gaps we would like to fill. So these states with no dots, the states with really small dots are some states where we could use more representation. But, definitely just looking for folks who just have a great equity team project in mind to apply. And so with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen, and we're going to hear from a couple of RJI alums about their experience in RJI and what they've been able to do with everything that they learned. Stop sharing. And so I guess we'll go in alphabetical order, and we can start with Denny Chan. Denny, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself and just sharing out with everybody like about your experience in RJI, your sort of equity team project, and sort of what came of all of that.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you to the Schreiber folks for having me on, and good to see all of you. So my name is Denny Chan. I'm the Managing Director for Equity Advocacy at Justice and Aging, and I use he and his pronouns. I participated in the 2019 cohort of RJI, so in the before times, before COVID-19. Just to give you a little bit of perspective, because I think it does inform the project and kind of what we've done with our experience at RJI. Justice and Aging, we're a national legal advocacy organization, and we primarily do administrative advocacy and litigation on behalf of low-income older adults. So we don't do direct services work, which is in contrast to a lot of the other organizations that participate in the Institute. So, you know, I wish I could tell you how much RJI has changed our organization and my life professionally. All the things that they've told you around the tools and the perspective and the network are absolutely true. You really leave the Institute with, at least I left the Institute with a very different perspective on how to embed race equity in our day-to-day advocacy. And the point that was made earlier about the network has an incredible reach. These are people who I can tell you I've probably not met some of them in person, but because we email and because I see them on my inbox, I feel like I know them. And in fact, last year when I had the opportunity to attend the 2023 convening, I was able to finally put faces to names, but it wasn't like I was meeting new people. It felt like I was meeting old friends. So our project was kind of a twofold project. There was an internal and an external piece. The external piece was looking to examine Medicaid home and community-based services and race inequities in the provision and access to those services. The internal piece was that, because that was primarily a health project, was to be able to come up with other equity-focused projects for our other teams. So outside of health, we have an income and housing team as well as an elder rights team. And that work has really taken off since 2019. You know, we came back from the Shriver Institute and then shortly, you know, found ourselves in the midst of COVID and George Floyd. And what our experience did was it actually seeded sort of our strategic initiative to advance equity for older adults, which we launched in 2020. And at the time when I joined Justice and Aging, when I participated in the Shriver Institute, I was a health attorney on our health team. And because of the strategic initiative and everything that happened, I took on a new role at Justice and Aging as the Managing Director for Equity Advocacy. So I oversee the implementation of our strategic initiative. So I kind of have to say that the Shriver RJI program gave me my job, transitioned me from working on health issues to really working across teams to make sure that equity is first and foremost in our advocacy. And even just the sort of point that Jay was making earlier around poverty and race being so linked, you know, we thought of ourselves primarily as attorneys who were fighting senior poverty, and we thought that meant we were doing race justice work. And that was a really simple but misguided notion, that you could do things to fight poverty but not have any impact on race equity. So even that conclusion coming out of the Institute, I think, helped us reorient ourselves to focus really on specific communities of older adults. And that continues today. So the Medicaid HCBS work has blossomed into a whole set of resources that we've released for our network. That part around the network, the RJI network, is really important and such a great sounding board for ideas and resources and troubleshooting. Last year, we were putting together a paper on tribal elders. And had sort of various issues in terms of outreach to tribal communities. And it was at the convening last year that we met with other advocates who were able to offer us different perspectives and contacts and expertise. So I think it's hard to say at this moment when you sort of are thinking about your project, it's hard to think of it as a linear thing. You don't really know all the different ways in which the Institute will really help your work. It's a lot more of what you put in and then that you will get out. So thanks to the Shriver folks for letting me share my experience and our experience so far. Happy to stick around and get questions and feedback too from folks.
Thank you so much, Denny. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And so now we're going to move to one of our alums from our inaugural cohort, the 2014 cohort, Kimberly Merchant. Kim, I feel like I don't even know how to introduce you at this point. Kim used to work with us at this.
I'm the OG.
Kim used to work here at the Shriver Center, but is now semi-retired. Kim, I feel like you're doing a very bad job of retiring, I have to say. Every time I call you, things are just on fire and you're running from meeting to meeting to meeting. Anyway, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kim to sort of share her RJI experience with you all.
Yeah, so as Generic explained, my experience started as early as 2014. At that time, I was working at the Mississippi Center for Justice. I'm currently in my home here in Greenville, Mississippi. And it was my first experience working for an advocacy organization. And so, in those places, you just sort of get there, figure out what's wrong, and just get to work. So no one had ever really given me a roadmap or any frameworks or ideas around what it is I should be doing, how my advocacy should be shaping up, or even a roadmap, just how to do the work. So I was just invited to join this first iteration of the Racial Justice Institute with two of my colleagues. And so we went through this experience, and for the first time, there were these concepts that were being shared, ideas that I had never heard of, and a roadmap. So it was like a light bulb moment for me as an advocate. My organization championed economic and racial justice, but the truth is, I just left RJI understanding that we weren't explicit enough about the racial justice component of what we were doing and how critical that was. So I was doing a lot of work around education, helping students who were being expelled and suspended, students who had disabilities who were not being accommodated in schools. I did education law and realized that 90% of my clients were Black boys, but never really stopped to examine the why. And so, we had this project when we left RJI. I don't even remember what the project was because it never really got off the ground, to be honest with you. But what I did was, as it related to my team and the education team, is we just started going back to the drawing board. So we used the concept of systems thinking that first time I even heard of the concept was through RJI, to develop this project to really assess why Black boys were being targeted and being disproportionately disadvantaged in the educational system. That, of course, then rolled into the juvenile justice system, which is what we saw in our work. That project culminated into a grant proposal to the Kellogg Foundation and a $5 million project. So that we did over 3 years, which is called a Sunflower County Systems Change Project. And if you join the Institute, you'll hear a little bit more about it and some components of what you'll learn there. But so it was just game changing for me. And after having done that, at that point, the Institute was being ran, but there was no director of the Institute. So in 2017, they were able to get funding. Shriver was to have a director, which is what Generic is now. I applied at that time and became the director of RJI. And that then began like the next level of my career. So I could take what I've learned, I could take my experience, how I transform my advocacy, and I could use that in the Institute, which is sort of what I did until I retired. So it's been transformed. I think Denny brought this up. What's really interesting is I met Denny through RJI. I now sit on the Advisory Council for Justice and Aging. I literally just got out of a session that I was doing with another alumni of RJI. I'm working with her organization to implement the same concepts that you learn in RJI within her organization. Another organization I'm working with the same thing. The thing is, when you meet these people, when you learn about their work, you're forever connected. You forever have that family, and it's just unbelievable to just have that network, that connection, to reach out to people. You ask for something on a listserv and 20 people respond to you. It's like more information or resources than you even need sometimes. And so that's the beauty of the Institute. Not only does it give you a framework, understanding these disparities we see in race, it gives you the tools you need to tackle them, to really look at the root cause of the issue, rather than sort of generating at that systems level, that symptoms level. Like, we can represent everybody who comes through our doors, or we can figure out why are all these people coming through our doors with the same problem, and try to really tackle the root cause of why it's happening. And that's really what the Institute brings to the space. So I'm gonna stop talking. Thank you for listening. And I'm excited about this year's cohort, and I look forward to reviewing all the applications from you guys and being a part of this next cohort that's coming up.
Thank you so much, Kim. Thanks so much, Jenny. And so we carved out a little bit of space for you all to perhaps ask either Kim or Jenny just any questions that you may have as it relates to them and their projects or their experience. Just wanted to give you a little time to perhaps ask them a question if you would like. Marilia, am I pronouncing this correctly?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I go by Marilia or Mari. Yeah, thank you so much so far for everybody who's presented the information. It's already sounds really exciting. My couple of questions, I think it's Kim and Denny, either of you could answer. If you experienced, after you participated as a fellow, if you felt like everybody in your organization was behind your participation, because my understanding is it's like maybe a few select in the orgs, and I'm not sure what size the organizations were in, but I'm curious if everybody was sort of on board along with you, both with the project and the idea of the shift that I guess needed to happen within those spaces.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think depending on who you ask from the Institute, you will find varying answers. In our experience, I think we were really lucky. Like I said before, when we went to the Institute, there were two of us. It was my colleague, Jennifer Goldberg, and myself who participated as a team. And what we found coming back was, and so at the time I was a health team attorney and Jennifer was the manager of our health team. She is now our deputy director. And so I think it's actually really helpful to have sort of a mix of people on your team as you're thinking about who you should, sort of be on your team, to help with that sort of support. Because it is a transition. Pre-RJI, we were not race equity focused at all. Coming back, you have this sort of transformative experience, the two of you, or at least we did, and you're speaking a certain language, you're talking about the iceberg model, and other people don't even know what you're talking about. And so there's a transition there, and that takes time. But I have found that in our organization, so we're at about 35 to 40 people now. People might have a lot of questions about what this means for their work, but no one is openly hostile or resistant. People have a lot of questions and good questions that we can, dig into. But we've been lucky in that both we've had people in leadership signal that this is a really important part of our work, and that we had people our team was constructed in a way that I think made implementation a little easier. I think sometimes where people get hung up is particularly buy-in from leadership.
Yeah, and and he's right. So the experience is going to be different depending on the organization. So the question is, what level of commitment does the organization have when you join? And then what level of commitment will they have once you come back? And also, what structure do they have in place for the implementation of that once you come back? Like Denny came back to an organization that embraced it, that allowed him and Jennifer the space to sort of take their time to figure out how do we now disseminate this amongst our staff. I can also say that, you know, one way that Shriver Center has tried to address that is by developing the Foundations on Racial Justice sort of training, because everybody can't go through RJI. And so it's like a little brief, or it's a different encapsulated sort of version of what people learn in RJI. So it really just depends on what your plan is when you come to RJI to do with that. And then what is your connection to and your plan with your organization to implement that when you leave. My experience at the Center for Justice was different because, and it was interesting for me because, and one of the reasons honestly why I ended up transitioning at that time, like we said, we were for race and economic justice, but going through RJI, I really questioned the racial justice component of that. And even the project that I did was completely ignored. I felt like I had no support until I got that $5 million from Kellogg. Then all of a sudden it was like the best thing since sliced bread. You know, money talks in that instance. But it gave me the space to do the work that I wanted to do in the way that I wanted to do. And I did have the autonomy and the authority to sort of control my team. But the whole organization, not necessarily. But the work that we did, yes, was race equity focused. So sometimes even when you think about your team, you should think about like, who do I need to have on my team to help me if I want to come back and do this work? Do I need the deputy director of the organization, somebody with some authority, some clout to help sort of champion this and say, this is good, this is what we want to do, this is the direction we want to move in? Otherwise, you could come back to your organization. We've had people who left the Institute and they're like the lone soldier in their organization without the support that they need to be successful. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's a great question, Maury. And I think Kim's going to present in just a moment on just sort of the equity team considerations, application considerations. And I think a piece of that is just thinking about your team composition and whether or not you may be able to include somebody on your team who is from sort of senior leadership, who is sitting at those tables and so can sort of continue to get the buy-in that you need to make your project successful during the Institute and once you get back to your organization. Does anybody else have a question? We have time for maybe one more. All right, not seeing any more questions. So Kim, I will kick it off to you. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, that's what happens when you're trying to share and talk at the same time. About what Generic just said, which are the application considerations, things you should be thinking about as you are completing your application. Team selection, members, it's really important. You know, oftentimes it becomes a who wants to go thing, and that was my experience. But we know from experience having the Institute over 10 years that being very strategic about who you select to be your team member is important. Why? And the application is going to ask you, why did you select this team member? What do they bring to your project, to the space? And not just a random selection of people. Organizational support, we keep talking about this over and over again. It's critical. You'll be asked, and your ED will have to sign a letter saying that they're going to give you the space to participate, that they support your participation in RJI. And we know sometimes it's a piece of paper with a signature on it, but hopefully it gives you some leverage in going back later once you start to get in there. And it's like, no, you got to do everything that you did before, but you also got to, if you want to do RJI too, like, no, you committed to this and this is a letter you signed. I don't know if that works, but organization support is critical and very important in terms of your experience in RJI. And then your equity team project, what you select as your equity team project. We found the best equity team projects are either something you're already working on, but you don't feel like it has a race equity focus, or something that just keeps you up at night. Like that one thing that you really wanted to address, but you haven't been able to, well, this is your opportunity to sort of think about that. So two just suggestions or ideas when you're thinking about what is my equity team project going to look like. Of course, we always have areas that we want you to think about with the team selection. Race, of course, is important because this is a Racial Justice Institute. So we understand and uplift the importance of diversity. So as best you can, have a diverse team. We do not like homogenous teams. We have taken homogenous teams because, like, if you're from a particular place and it's clear having a homogenous team is going to be really difficult, but we feel like the organization really needs this, then that's someone who, so we've done it before, but we prefer you really being thoughtful about creating a diverse team if it's important, and diverse around race, gender, and all other identities that makes people unique. And then also think about the diversity around positional authority. We just talked about that, the importance of maybe having the right people on the team who can help you with the support that you'll need to be successful. Creativity. So you get points for creativity on the application. We always and have always had a difficult time with this. Everybody on your team doesn't have to be from your organization, and everybody from your team does not have to be an attorney. So if there is a partner organization that you work with who has a person who might want to participate with you, think about that. Think about, we've had teams with multiple organizations, 3 and 4 organizations, 7 and 8 organizations. We've had teams with community partners who are social workers, who are development people, who are organizers. So just again, be creative about what your team could look like, and your team should be indicative of whatever project you're doing, because sometimes they have these teams that have people working across different subject areas. And then when it comes time to pick a team project, you're working in one area, but this person doesn't have the knowledge base or expertise around that area, and they feel a little disconnected from the project. And then you have less participation from 1 or 2 or multiple members of your team. So think about that in terms of what you decide to do and who you select to be a part of your team. And then the number of advocates on the team, I mean, you can cram as many people in there as you want. But again, be thinking about, and the applications will require you to explain what is their individual contribution to the team. As we talked about organizational support, you want hopefully an organization that honors the time commitment that's associated with this. And I talked about this before. Think about current race equity advocacy things that you're doing. So your project can be internal or it can be external. It can be some work that you externally do within your organization. Some people, and we get a lot of folks, particularly lately, who want to do internal projects. We want to look within our organization. We want to be sure we're walking our talk. And we need to sort of work on that. So you can, some people do one or the other, and some people do both. Like they'll do a combination of an external, but also work on some internal things. And then your equity team projects, I just said it can be internal or external. It's important to know that when you describe your equity team project in your application, please, 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 please address it around the racial disparities that you want to address. We have so many people explaining the issue that they want to address in a neutral way. Like we want to tackle eviction rates in our community. Okay. But make sure when you're describing and talking about it, you're talking about how those eviction rates impact diverse groups within your community, because that's the way we talk about it in the Institute. And it helps us understand that you get it. Even if you do address it neutrally, you're going to have to change it at some point anyway, because if you make it through the Institute, we're going to force you to think about it from that perspective. But it'd be great to start with that in mind. So some recruitment priorities, as Generic says, he showed you the map. They're always trying to expand both the diversity within the Institute, the network itself, but also the diversity as it relates geographically in different practice areas. Like we think about diversity from so many different levels because everybody brings something very unique to the table. So these are some areas that we still have like either not a lot of representation or not as much as we would like. You see the various practice areas here. So if you work in these practice areas, it will give you some additional points. If you don't, it doesn't keep us from accepting you, but we really would love to get people who are like doing voting rights work. We may have one organization right now that sort of does that, or organizations who address Native and Indigenous issues, things like that, as well as we know that this community, meaning the sort of the legal aid, public interest community, is overrepresented by women to begin with. So we're always looking for men, and we're particularly looking for men of color because just as the representation is sort of low across just public interest work that we do, the same is true in the Institute. So we would love to increase that representation in Native and Indigenous community within RJI as well, the immigrant and trans community. So we're thinking about all those things, just different areas. And then, of course, as Jay mentioned before, we have some areas that are either underrepresented or not represented at all. Like, I'm probably the only participating member from my team, and our team was the only team from Mississippi, and that's why Mississippi is on here, because it's underrepresented. But there are areas where we've had no representation, like Oklahoma or New Hampshire. And you can just sort of see where these little hearts are areas where RJI would love to increase sort of participation. And here they are in written form. And Jay, I think, is going to probably share this slide deck after today, so you guys will have it in a little more detail. And so I'm going to now turn it to Jay to talk about some of the application deadlines.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Kim. If you could just keep this up real quick, and then we can move on to questions. Yeah. But just to bring it into the room a little bit, the application is due by February 28th, and then starting, I would say, in mid-March. Well, that's not true. So in early March, the selection committee will start to get together and review applications. You'll start to get notifications about your acceptance around March 20th and 22nd, and then sort of laying all this out, because we do need to understand by March 27th whether you intend to actually attend the Institute and how it is that you intend to pay. Most years we have a bit of a waiting list for RJI, and we just want to make sure that the folks who are accepted intend to join before we decline somebody else the opportunity to join the Institute. And I think that's about it for this, Kim. And so wanted to just open it up for just any questions that folks might have at this point. Tanae, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yeah, that's correct, Tanae. Hi, thank you so much. So the question that I had is about how developed does your project need to be at the application point? I'm not sure if I'm getting a little confused about it or not. Does it have to be like a fully developed project at that point, or something that's partially there and it's being developed more throughout the cohort? Can you just clarify that a little bit?
Yeah, thanks so much for that question, Tanae. That's a great question. It doesn't need to be fully fleshed out when you come to us. We would love it if you could make sure that we understand that you understand the sort of race equity disparities that are present in that issue area, that are sort of present in that community, or even within your organization. So if you could make sure to sort of sketch that out in the application, that would be great. But it doesn't have to be fully fleshed out. And then further to that, I will say, you're not limited to only working on the project that you pitch when you through your application and through the application process. Through RJI, you're going to continue to learn more tools. You're going to continue to sort of hear different case examples from different advocates all across the country. And it's okay if, based on what you're learning and based on the sort of research that you're doing while you're in RJI, if you determine that you sort of want to shift your project a little bit. Things change, like the leadership in your organization may change, the leadership in your community might change. And you may start to find that you have more or less leverage in some of those communities based on some of those shifts, right? And so we want to allow you to be as flexible as you need to be so that the project itself is sustainable when you leave. So you're not locked into doing what you submit in your application, and it doesn't have to be like completely fleshed out as a part of the application. Thank you so much. That's a great question. Anybody else? Tanae, do you have another question? Oh.
I do, and also I want to pause if other people have questions.
That's very kind of you. I think we'll just let you go though, because I don't see that anybody else has one.
Okay, so you all mentioned if we potentially wanted to talk about projects beforehand. So I guess, could you give an example of like what would that conversation look like? So someone's coming to you beforehand that's like, hey, I want to chat about project, like what sorts of things would they need to kind of already show up with, or what could this potential conversation look like?
It's sort of a brainstorm, in a way, you know, like, I mean, I love just being able to sort of sit down with an advocate and just think through all the pieces. I think that, you know, people have questions about team composition. So they come to us with a certain project in mind and sort of share with us the people that they're considering applying with as a part of the team, and just kind of gut checking us on whether that sounds good to us. And I think all of it's really undergirded by folks just trying to make sure that what they're doing, what they're pitching, will be successful ultimately, right? Like, I think people are just sort of always wondering, based on our experience working with folks in RJI over the years, like what's been the most successful. So it's a bit of a brainstorm. So, you know, all you really have to bring is that spirit of inquiry, really. I mean, hopefully you've thought a little bit about what the project could look like, and then just sort of like based on that, we can just kind of take it from there, really. Sometimes if people are further down the line in their thinking, what they might do is email me to sort of set a time, and then, you know, also maybe in that meeting include the different members of their prospective team so that we can all get together and discuss it. But it's really up to you and just sort of based on just sort of where you're at in that moment, really. But I'm happy to meet with you more than once. Definitely done that before. So if you want to have an initial discussion and brainstorm, and then go back to the drawing board and kind of pull your team together, and then pull me back in to meet with those folks, I'm happy to do that. So I'll just sort of meet you where you're at, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, thank you. And then to clarify, it is 3,500 per person, and there's no like in-person component. That's okay.
Correct. Yeah, so we sort of increased the price this year, and then I was sort of only comfortable doing it if there wasn't a mandatory in-person component, because I just didn't want to increase the cost too much. So yeah, thanks so much, Tanae. And then I'm going to uplift Jennifer's message in the chat. Thank you for this presentation. Found it very helpful in getting a better understanding of RJI. Grateful for your time. Well, thank you, Jennifer. Thank you. And again, so, you know, reach out if you have any questions. Reach out if you would like to just get together one-on-one to chat about your prospective project. But I'm going to turn it over to Christina really quick before we lose any more folks.
Oh yeah, just echoing what Janet said, feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Our emails are on the screen, but we'll also email you afterwards the recording so you can review it or share it with your networks. And I also want to shine a light on some of our other upcoming trainings that we have. I will share a link in the chat so y'all can read more about it. But we have Foundations for Racial Justice starting in a couple weeks. We also have community lawyering and supervising for quality and impact. So please check out the link to read more on those programs. Other than that, that is the end of the presentation. I hope you, I can pass it back to you.
Thanks so much, Christina. I'm happy to stick around to potentially answer more questions. So I'll hang out for a few moments, but you know, we'll email you the recording, we'll email you the slides, and again, just please be in touch if you have any questions at all. And I want to give a special shout out to Denny for joining us today to share his expertise and experience, and also to Kim for joining us and helping me present since I'm under the weather. Thanks so much.